Thank you to everyone who is joining us. We'll start right at the top of the hour.
Sam, just letting you know, we can see your Facebook page, by the way.
We can see your MySpace page.
All right, we are right at the top of the hour. We will go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone for joining us. On behalf of AIMHI, the American Ambulance Association, NASEMSO, and NAEMT, this session will be recorded and made available to all participants within a few days. If you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A function. This can be found if you hover over the bottom of your screen. It should be somewhere near the chat function. It will have a Q&A. Please submit all questions for the panelists there. With that, I invite Matt Zavatsky to speak.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate you doing that quick intro and being the maestro behind the scenes. I also want to thank our panelists. You know, we have an amazing group of panelists here that have unique insights from both an operational perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. So it's really great to have that mix because we want to give some best practices from all of those different sort of perspectives. And many of you have joined the webinar because we're faced with a worker crisis like we have not seen in this profession in a long time. And Sam, we can go to the next couple of news articles. And many of you subscribe to some of these news services or go to the AIMHI webpage and look at the news that we post there pretty regularly. And these are things that these are news articles that we are seeing happening all the way back into 2019 when the rural community was really one of the first EMS communities to face this severe worker shortage. Next slide, please. And we're seeing now fire chiefs and EMS chiefs all over the country beginning to sort of warn their community that call volumes are super high. There's a worker shortage, ambulance shortages, ER delays getting patients off of our stretchers in the emergency departments. And that is going to be difficult for us to manage in the near future, but certainly we need to come up with some long-term strategies to see if we can kind of fix this issue. We can go to the next slide, Sam. And this just came out this month. It was this NBC News story that was really, again, highlighting this issue. So it's something that we really, really need to address. And we're really fortunate to have the panelists that we have here being able to share with us some of those best practices. Next slide. And again, just last week. So these will be in the recording and in the handouts that we make available for everybody. And we're fortunate that the Dialing 911 in Charlotte article that just came out literally this week, John from Medic is with us on the panel, and he's going to walk us through the concept and how they implemented this in Charlotte. But we're going to start the conversation with Wayne Harbor from the Richmond Ambulance Authority, who originally apparently was also from Pinellas that we found out during the warm-up session. So Wayne, take it away, sir.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Wayne Harbour. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer and Interim Chief Operating Officer for the Richmond Ambulance Authority. So we'll just dive right in. Next slide. So to kind of back up what Matt said, National Registry data from 2019, we had 292,000 EMTs, 17,000 AEMTs, and 110,000 paramedics. And then in, next slide, 2020, we saw a little bit of a decrease. Not much, but it started happening. So next slide. In 2021, we lost a good 40% of our paramedics, 38% of our EMTs, and 38% of our advanced EMTs. So we started feeling the pinch in Richmond. And some of the things that we did, we started our own EMT class. But first, we had to take a look at the local ordinances and see what we could do, what we couldn't do. So what we did is check the state and found out that we could have an operator and an EMT on an ambulance, and we could put them out there in the field and increase our staffing a little bit, which it did help. So next slide. Next thing we had to do is go for the local ordinance. Okay, we were an all ALS system, but we saw the need to become a tiered system, BLS and ALS. So one of the things we had to do is go before City Council and get the Richmond City Code changed. And it took a little while, but we were successful. In the meantime, what we were doing, we were expanding our EMT base by doing in-house classes. We have what's called educational coordinators here in Virginia. Fortunately, I have two of them that work in our clinical department. So we started doing in-house EMT classes. So what we would do is 2 days a week, they would be in class. 2 days a week, they would be on an ambulance with an EMT doing calls. So that kind of helped the preception process along too. One of those things you don't really think about, but it occurs. So we got them some extra field time, and seems to be working great. Our classes are exponentially getting bigger. Our next class that starts next month is going to be 22 EMT cadets. So we're moving along. We are by no means out of the woods. These are all things that we're doing ongoing. We're thinking outside of the box every chance that we get. So one of the things that we're trying to do also, next slide, is to retain people. We have a very robust critical incident stress management team, and we may have overutilized our peer support team during COVID. So one of the things that we started noticing with the peer support through the employees is they were getting burned out too. So one of the things that we did is we went out and we hired a licensed professional counselor, and that would be the young lady in the picture. And she brought along with her a therapy dog. And we took our peer support team, got them away from here for a day, and just let them talk it out with Mary Margaret here. And they're better. They're not quite to where they were when they first started, but you know, we're still in a pandemic, but they're much better. So we need to take care of our people too. We can hire as many people as we want, but if we don't take care of our folks, they're not going to stay. Next step, or next slide, I'm sorry. So we've been doing this for a number of years. Our medical director is a pilot, and pilots are very checklist oriented. So, and that's okay, because we should be checklist oriented also. So we make sure that our folks have the information that they need to get ready for their shift. So we have PAVE, which is a pre-shift readiness check. And I'm not going to read every one because you guys can go back through and read them, but it's personal, ambulance, environment, and external pressures. And that's a really good starting place. And then the I'm safe is illness. Okay, we're in a pandemic, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get a cold or flu or anything. Medication, have you taken too much cough syrup because you're ill? Stress, well, welcome to EMS. It's a very stressful, job to do. Alcohol, have you had the opportunity to recover from any alcohol that you've consumed? And fatigue, this is probably worse than alcohol, because you don't know when you're overly fatigued. And eating, my wife kind of made me put this one in because she's very keen on eating healthy. So you need to eat before the start of your shift, and make sure you have healthy food while you're working. Next slide. And up next is Craig.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. We have a big, heavy rainstorm coming through my area in Florida here, so I hope I don't get knocked off. But ready for the first slide, Amanda. Pinellas County, we're on the Gulf of Mexico and Tampa Bay, Florida, and just wanted to kind of give you an idea of our system size. So when we're talking about things, we have about 1,800 personnel that work for our fire departments and SunStar. We serve about 1 million population, 24 cities, Clearwater, Largo, St. Pete. We are recruiting, sunstarcareers.com, sunstarcareers.com. We respond to over 220,000 calls a year, over 175,000 patient transports. So, a pretty large, metro system. Next slide. So I wanted to start out with kind of the idea of raising the EMS industry. And Albert Einstein, probably lots of different people have said this, but I found his quote, "In the midst of every crisis lies a great opportunity." And I think this is going to be very painful for us. It's been pretty painful for us locally, not too far out of range. But the public now really expect a robust public safety system, 911, police, fire, EMS. You see the national news when there's issues or gaps of just how high that expectation is. So I think that we as EMS leaders, we've kind of pieced together and cobbled together, regardless of our system design, we've been understating the financial and human resource needs really from the beginning. And, even in my system, that's very robust. We've held off, during financial times to not add positions and, different things. And, we're kind of at this point now, next slide, where we really need to look at like an orchestra conductor, taking it from the top, beginning at the very beginning with the difficult questions of how are we answering 911? How are we handling our EMD? Do we have enough trucks on the street? So, if you just say, to deal with our workforce issue, we're just going to up pay and that's all we're going to do. But they don't want to come work for us because our ambulances are junk, or, there's 10 trucks on the street and there should be 25, and they're overworked. It really has to be holistic and a systemic approach. And are we meeting all of the things that we should have been doing all along? And so while we're fixing a crisis, I think, me working in county government, if I bring to my board just a single slice of a problem rather than a holistic fix, and have to keep going back, that's really a problem from an elected body, perspective. So when you're looking at this, it needs to be holistic of what are the 100 things that need to be done in order to really address, this across the board. I think that really gives us an opportunity to be raising the bar and setting more competitive expectations. Like, are we losing folks to the fire service or to hospitals or to law enforcement? Maybe not so much law enforcement right now. We've got a little bit better a deal in EMS that the public still mostly likes us. Next slide. So 50 years when we get to 2023, and that really, makes us think about in that 50 years, EMS has become and is an essential service. We need that law, charter, ordinance in every EMS system and state, regardless of what your service model is. So I was fortunate to come into a system that in 1988 had a local ordinance said, we're going to upgrade to state-of-the-art levels of performance and maintain that on a go-forward basis. So I've used that from time to time when I felt that we're being small ball and not, implementing something as large as we should for our size of system, and went back to leaders and county administration and our board, our advisory boards, and said, that's our approach there. So when we're 50 years old here, are we at industry standards, accreditation, standards of care? What are our components that need lagging upgrade? And we all have a lot of work to do. Next slide. So what are we doing locally? And so I wanted to talk about public messaging. That's part of my role in the system, because we are multi-agency, is from my perspective, definitively, quickly, without raising alarm. So we went to our board with, you've got to know where we stand, and we have a lot of open positions, and we need to increase wages. And so we talk about the resources needed, in terms of funding and filling open positions. We didn't talk about turnover percentages, which in my mind can make it seem like your system or your service really sucks when you're doing everything you can to serve your community. So we stayed positive and avoided any negative rhetoric to not get that mass media, spin on us locally, because we've got a lot of hard working folks that, are on trucks and taking care of patients every day. So becoming an employer of choice, is a big, buzzword, serving our patients, our community. We really focused on all of healthcare as experiencing staffing issues. It's not solely an EMS issue. And, we got to get above. In Florida, we've got the new minimum wage, and that was part of our package to say that we needed to make sure that we weren't driving our EMTs and paramedics closer to minimum wage. We do focus a lot on dealing with stressful work, long hours, exposed to human tragedy, post-traumatic stress, on-the-job illness and injury that we're subject to. So we do want to make sure that they're understanding the scope of that work that we're asking our folks. So we have to attract and retain a highly skilled workforce. Next slide. Next piece that we did now a couple of years ago to try to work ahead is all new paramedics and EMTs go through a county EMS academy. It's a 2-week classroom followed by a field internship, recommendation from their agency, and capstone testing protocol and scenarios with a medical director before they get cleared. We have been able to crunch our time from 120 days to 70 days to clear new personnel. And we're taking about a 70% first time pass to an over 95% pass. We're adding hundreds of new EMTs and paramedics system-wide each year in our system. And we've seen, knock on wood, no increase in quality assurance reviews, which would be any type of review about inadequate treatment, medication errors, complaints, those sorts of things. Next slide. Recruiting and retaining. So, you can't just, raise the pay and then stop there. So working on really three pieces: pay, equipment, mission, and making sure that it's a good place to come to work. And so we're working on partnership with our schools. We need to do more work on our workforce development. Can we get some grant dollars, things like that? Honestly, we're stealing EMTs and paramedics from the region, the state, and nationally. EMS in Paradise, the cool little picture there. But I think that that's in some ways good for us because it makes us all up our game of how do we all recruit and retain. So we've got a project right now on power loads. Is that we had held off, it's $1 million plus to do it. And we finally said, we've just got to add power loads, and hopefully that makes a career more sustainable for a medic or an EMT. So we've got to keep up our fleet. We've got to keep up our personal protective equipment. We're very early on with P100 gas masks so that it was easier on the crews rather than donning doffing N95s during COVID, the peak of COVID, and ballistic vests and helmets. So we always start with, are we being safe? Are we protecting our crews? On the people side, lots of pictures, give lots of awards, thank people a lot, feed people. Sunstar is very good at feeding people. Supervisors checking in daily that they appreciate what you're doing, know what you're doing, know about your calls. And so measuring employee engagement and satisfaction, we're in the 85 percentile, which is really pretty phenomenal. That was done just recently. Next slide. So mitigation strategies that we've used, we've put some peak transport units on from fire rescue on overtime. Our peak units are mixed staffing, so trying to keep up staffing. We can use a Sunstar ambulance with an EMT or paramedic from fire rescue. We have been using our rescue units that are typically non-transport to transport during peak periods. We're trying to move demand a bit by changing our non-emergency response times or scheduled pickup times. If you know, Pinellas, we had always been all ALS, and probably 4 or 5 years ago, we went to a mixed fleet BLS ALS. Utilizing mutual aid, that's difficult because we're all in the same boat, but we have done that for some of our long distance, things like that. Downgrading transports without a medical necessity. We used to just, you call, we come. Now we're trying to make sure that there's a medical necessity that helps us on getting paid later, but also right sizing to stretcher van or wheelchair van. That's something that we hadn't had and added to local ordinance a couple of years ago. Mixed staffing in your community could be paid volunteer, clinical, non-clinical, managers getting out there and getting out in the field. I'm sad to say that we're still on mandatory overtime. So from my standpoint, use it last and turn it off first, best that you can. Next slide. So some final thoughts here, from my standpoint is I'm pretty concerned about, COVID not ending. What's the next wave? You're looking at, major cities, LA, Chicago, New York City, with vaccine mandates and what that's doing to staffing, inflation and recession, global supply chain, fuel prices. So in my mind, we need to keep working ahead to reduce stress and failure points in our systems. So supporting personnel, maintaining equipment, kind of going across the whole board. And I see a chat. I didn't get into cultural sorts of things, but that's really important about dealing with the culture and making sure that you're supporting all of our field personnel. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. We're going to turn over to Ron from the Northeast. And Ron, what's been happening? What are you guys doing in Cataldo to help keep your workforce effective?
Great. Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. Great job, Wayne and Craig. Presentations are excellent. Thanks for the opportunity. Ron Caranto. I am the Executive Vice President here at Cataldo Ambulance Service. A little bit about us. We are family owned and operated here in Massachusetts, 44 years in business, largest 911 provider servicing 20 municipal contracts. Our makeup is about 850 employees. We have about 170 vehicles. So just to kind of set the stage, I'm the vice chair of the American Ambulance Association Workforce Committee, and I chair the Mass Ambulance Operations Committee. So been speaking with those groups quite a bit lately and trying to gather some of their challenges and best practices to bring to you all today. So we'll go ahead and jump in and share some of those with all of you. Next slide, please. I think we're all going to see some common themes today. I think we have some ideas that are maybe slightly different than others that we want to share with you all. And I tell our folks all the time, if we can address the staffing issue, all other things will fall into place. You know, a lot of the challenges that we all face on a day-to-day basis are because of the lack of staffing. So big focus on that. And as we look at opportunities to improve staffing, retention needs to be on the forefront, right? How do we take care of our existing employees and maintain the existing staff to avoid the need to hire at the rates we're all trying to hire at? So increased training, something we've been doing. We're an accredited training institution here at Cataldo. We have been running EMT programs for years now. With the pandemic and the increase in staffing shortages, we've offered the accelerated EMT program, which we run full-time Monday through Friday. And we have chosen to compensate the individuals who attend the class while they're in the training at a reduced rate. And once they successfully complete the course and get their certification, we then obviously upgrade them to EMT. We continue to run traditional training, typically 2 nights a week and some occasional Saturdays over the course of 3 months. We do offer employment while they take that traditional EMT training. We run share car service. We do quite a bit with the state on vaccinating and testing with the recent pandemic. So we have opportunities for individuals to work while they train. What's new to us is advanced EMT training. As Massachusetts has adopted change regulation to allow for paramedic basic staffing, we're obviously utilizing EMTs to staff paramedic units. If we can train and recruit advanced EMTs, we can utilize those individuals on the paramedic units and free up those EMTs to work on the basic units. So that's been a big initiative. We have quite a few folks in that training right now. We are in our final stages to become an accredited paramedic training site, which is exciting and provides opportunity for our employees and obviously folks from the outside to train here and to create that career path. So we have, we hire at that chair car. We are taking advantage of the new state waiver here in Massachusetts, as many of the services are. I think a lot of us have held off as much as we can to maintain that minimum staffing at the double EMT and or double paramedic level. But unfortunately, just given the circumstances, we're going to utilize the first responder model. We've created a safeguard around that to assure that they're uniquely identified in our computer-aided dispatch system. Our supervisors and dispatchers know which units are staffed with a first responder and an EMT to do low acute hospital transfers, interfacility work, things like that. So that we're hopeful that if we can hire first responders and staff additional resources at that level, it'll decompress some of the other systems, the municipal systems and the EMTs that are being pulled to do some of the hospital work. And that will help with that retention piece that we're all trying to stay focused on. I think we've all seen, or at least here in Massachusetts, quite a bit of pay rate adjustments. Everyone's playing the add $1 or $2 to the rates to attract. Unfortunately, it hasn't done a lot for the services, except increase to the bottom line. But we all recognize that our staff are grossly underpaid, but we'll get into the reimbursement piece in a minute, which will help address that. Our model and many others here are to bring in first responders slightly below the starting wage for an EMT, but yet compensate the EMT that's been assigned to that first responder vehicle at a higher rate, with the understanding that that individual is going to carry a majority of the work. They're going to tech all the patients. They're going to document all the electronic patient care reports. So incentivize those more senior EMTs to take that first responder and assist us in getting those hospital discharges and so forth completed. Enhanced social media, community outreach. This is an area that we just don't do enough of. I think as an industry, we've failed ourselves. And too often you get into school systems and have conversations with folks and they don't even think or know that EMS is a career opportunity for them. I've done plenty of opportunities or had plenty of opportunities to go into vocational schools. And once you have a truck outside and you go through the pitch, you've got a dozen people with their hands raised saying, how do I sign up? So we definitely need to do more community outreach and let folks know that this is a career path that is a great opportunity for them. I mentioned the retention efforts. We're doing a lot. We have a weekly meeting here with all the disciplines to talk about improving the annual review process, continue to have base meetings. We had an actual company meeting last night, self-evaluation forms, any and all opportunities to enhance the work environment and the job satisfaction for our field staff. That needs to be and continue to be on the forefront. A lot of activity going on here. Dennis Cataldo, our president and CEO, is the president of Mass Ambulance. A lot of discussions with Mass Hospitals, Mass Extended Care, skilled nursing facilities, and the dialysis centers on how we can move the patient population better and how can we get to the state and federal levels, even with the AAA, on rate increases and other incentives for the field providers to engage them in considering this career. Next slide, please. Like many, we've done referral bonuses. We have a pretty aggressive one going on right now, trying to incentivize folks to refer folks between now and the end of the year with some enhanced return on that. Our belief is we'd rather turn the money around on our existing employees than pay thousands of dollars to an outside person to come in and give them money when we've had employees sitting here working hard who deserve the recognition. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide and probably, I think, the biggest takeaway. So as I mentioned, a lot of discussion here with the Mass Ambulance Operations Committee, and we've probably never collaborated as much as we do today with all the private ambulance services in and around Massachusetts. We're all obviously in the same position. We're all trying to accomplish the same goal, which is most important: deliver good patient care, good customer service, and as much best on-time performance as possible. I've been working with a software developer to create a platform in which those that choose to can join in, and there'll be a visual display similar to what you see here in the comm centers of those services that choose to join, and it'll show available non-dedicated resources on a map of all the agencies. Too often, we're very inefficient because we obviously didn't know that another ambulance service had a resource outside the door of a call that may be going on, or resources are readily available that we just don't see or know. Our dispatch centers are all calling one another, but as we all know, dispatchers hold their vehicles close to the vest, and if they did have one truck, they're not going to give it away because I'm sure they know they're going to get another call in. But if we have that visualization, it'll allow us the opportunity to do a better job with system status management. You take this call for me, my next available unit will cover the next call for you. We'll deliver better service, better patient care and outcomes. This technology also affords the opportunity to do CAD transfers. So I can take the call that you just took from me, drop it in your CAD, And the CAD times will actually repopulate in mine at the end of the day. So if it is my account and I generate a report for that account, I'll actually still be able to provide them with those timestamps, even if some other service did it. So I can make myself available. Our contact information will be up at the end of this presentation, but I think this technology and visualization of resource availability is going to just enhance the collaboration that we already have going with our partners in the area to make resources more readily available. And that's all for me. Next slide. Off to
All right,
Ken.
Ron, thank you very much. And thanks to the AAA. For some of you, the AAA, the IFC, IFF, NAEMT, a number of other associations meet every other week at the same time to collaborate. AAA has been a great partner, and good luck on your conference this week in the great state of, in the great Republic of Texas, in the Fort Worth area. So speaking of Texas and Fort Worth, let's bring in Ken Simpson. Ken is our Chief Executive Officer here, newly minted, doing a phenomenal job. Ken, what are some things that are going on at MedStar to help retain and attract employees?
Well, good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. I know where you are, Matt, but go to the next slide. Just a little bit about MedStar. We're a public utility model, and we serve 14 cities, about 500 square miles in total, a little more than 1 million residents, had over 170,000 calls last year. We are completely self-operated with no tax subsidy. And we've got advisory boards that report up to our MedStar board. They are made up of our first responders and our emergency physicians advisory board, which are made up of the medical directors from all the area ERs. We got to get a lot of community input into that. Next slide, please. So the interesting thing about the pandemic is it has opened up a lot of opportunities and a lot of doors, and some of the commonalities I think we've already heard in some of the presentations are just looking for different ways to do things. We talk a lot about the catchment that EMS and specifically 911 is, and we've been for years been trying to address all of the issues with an ambulance, and in a lot of cases an ambulance and 1 or 2 paramedics and an EMT. So we've been talking about for quite a while here in Fort Worth the idea of running a tiered system. And in February of this year, we started a pilot project with that. And we put out BLS ambulances on the 911 side of our service area to test that out. This allows us to really sort of match up the level of care that the people that are calling 911 are getting. Because as we all know, a paramedic can't do a whole lot for a stub toe or a toothache. So it adds unit hours to the system also, and it's just a more efficient way to address that. So people are understandably a little bit hesitant towards change. The nice thing about this is we set it up as a pilot program. I'd strongly suggest any changes to your system be set up as a pilot program. Invite all the stakeholders in for input and direction as far as how the program is going, and just gather feedback as far as how, what kind of changes they'd like to see or whether they think it's going well. That way you've got a good pulse on everything as the program moves along. Next slide, please. Here's a list of some of the people that have been involved in our pilot program. You see a good mix there of our system medical director and a lot of different fire chiefs from the EMS system here in the greater Fort Worth area, and from our board as well. We went through the selection process, and the EMD codes we were thinking of using. We brought before this committee. We also brought before the committee the methodology we used to get to those. It's very important that as change comes, that it's very open and transparent. with all your stakeholders in the system, so they understand why, they understand the objectives, and they understand how the program is going. That's why we ended up with such a large, excuse me, large group here. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a little bit of methodology around how we chose some of these calls, and they're really around whether ALS interventions were done at all, the transport percentages, and then we looked at critical interventions like intubations, defibrillation, things like that, and stable versus unstable vital signs. And we set standards for that, essentially thresholds. We wanted to start with a very low threshold. We didn't want to have a very large chance that a BLS truck would necessarily come across somebody with unstable vital signs, or have to, or need some sort of life altering intervention. And so we were, really conservative with this. The actual feedback from the committee has been that they feel as though we can be a little bit more aggressive, and they'd like to be a little bit more aggressive in some of the BLS eligible calls. Since we've added more BLS trucks to the system, we have actually been sending them to some of the ALS calls with an ALS fly car if they're closer to the call, or if we're running into a situation where there's low system levels, and that has actually gone very well also. Some really positive outcomes from that. Next slide, please. And so as we've gone through this we started, I think it was every 2 weeks we were meeting with the group, and it got to be a little bit much. So we went to monthly meetings, but basically we went through and we provided the measures from the BLS project to the group, and then we report them up to a larger committee as well, to give an idea of how many responses we're sending BLS trucks on, how many patients are getting assessed, the transport percentages, and things like that. And so the EMS, the ones that are highlighted green there are the BLS eligible calls. I mentioned that we have sent some BLS ambulances on some calls that had been previously, they are designed for ALS responses, so we wanted to report those as well. And then the other interesting thing that's coming out of this is we're keeping an eye on the transport percentages as well, to get a good idea about how many of these people are actually being transported. Next slide, please. When we set up our pilot program, right from the beginning, we set out goals and metrics we wanted to see. Is there, one of the big things from this was ALS skills utilization and the ability to for paramedics to do more ALS interventions. Essentially, the theory behind it is that the paramedics' time is not as watered down with some of the BLS calls that you don't have to do any interventions with. So you get more proficient paramedics out of it. And we're essentially benchmarked that on the front end before we started the pilot project, and we'll measure it going forward. Obviously increased unit hour percentages, same theory there, that we benchmarked it at the beginning, and we track it going forward as far as our ability to put up additional unit hours. And then benchmarking response time metrics. During COVID, that's been a little bit of a challenge. We're working through some of the things because we have been spending a little bit more time doing, or at least through parts of the project, a little bit more time doing screening with the EADS tool and things like that. But again, the idea is that get better compliance with the different priority levels in our response time goals. And then our overall unit hour expense. Paramedics and EMTs, there's obviously an hourly cost differential. We set up our ambulances pretty much all the same. So they're all set up for the most part to the ALS level. That's a decision that we made within the system because it allows any paramedic to get on an ambulance and have all the tools that they need there pretty much, except for narcotics, obviously, to be able to take care of that patient. So, so in some systems, I've worked in systems before where the BLS ambulances are actually set up differently, and there's some capital, lower capital costs associated with those BLS ambulances as well. But again, we wanted to measure the financial impact of that. So these 4 goals or objectives here, they were set by the subcommittee after a lot of discussion and feedback, and we drafted them and got approval and took them to the larger committee also, and we continue to report on these. Next slide, please. Out of this, we were able to hire a lot more, obviously a lot more EMTs. We continue to hire paramedics as well. This is a picture of one of our larger classes. There are about 40 people in this new hire class, which is pretty remarkable during the pandemic. I'd also mention, as several others have mentioned here, we went through and did several other things to work to attract people, and had a lot of conversations with everybody through the workforce as far as what they place value on in efforts to try to attract people. But again, the ability to onboard EMTs, it's interesting to them because they get the experience to work on a 911 ambulance, on a BLS 911 ambulance specifically. And so those that are interested in going to paramedic school, they also get the opportunity to kind of lead the ambulance. And so we've had a lot of positive feedback from that. Next slide, please. So along the system redesign line of thought here, some of what we've talked a little bit about are taking a look at some of the calls that we're running on that have really low, they're low acuity and they have low transport percentages. Here in Texas, people like to run into each other a lot. And so we run a lot of motor vehicle accidents. The fire department has to go on those calls anyway for fire concerns. And so some of the conversations we've had early on with some of these lower acuity calls are, letting fire get on and do the initial assessment and call us if you need us, basically. Because again, we're burning ambulance resources to go out and get refusals or AMAs or just realize that nobody was hurt, because we'll get a lot of the fender benders where somebody drives by and says, hey, there's a car accident. I don't know if anybody's hurt, but it doesn't look like much damage. And, we send a whole lot of resources out to that call. And of course, there's, inherent danger with that, being on the interstate and dealing with the dangers of traffic and things like that that we can avoid. So we have that opportunity to cut down on the amount of resources that we're sending to some of these things that have been historically lower acuity and low treatment percentages. So next slide, please. So I saw a comment come across about culture earlier in one of the other presentations. And, we've really focused on having a good time at work. There's a quadruple aim that everybody talks about: better health, better care, lower cost, joy in work. Yes, I know I just read that slide to you, but anyway, next slide, please. I think it kind of builds. So we did, interestingly enough, this started during EMS week as kind of a last thought. One of our managers kind of came up with this flag wars idea. I think you can hit it 2 more times. We'll put all the pictures up there. Thank you. And it really took off. It was a lot of fun. We had a great time with it. And so it was a Nerf war and a water gun war. We had to lay out some groundwork because our IT folks got very concerned that we were going to drench the CAD equipment and computers and things like that. So we had to prohibit water around the electronics. But basically all the departments got a flag, and you see there that they could steal the flag for the day. If you got shot with a Nerf gun, you had to give your flag up. You see the note from our medical director there. A little bit of perhaps cheating, but like I said, everybody had a great time with it. And it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of involvement, got out in the, people got out in the field a little bit trying to capture flags back and forth. And, it was very interesting. So those were some, next slide, please. So the flag wars then went into ball wars. This is one of our NEOP groups, the first picture that's popping up here. And that is, they really got into it. As you can tell, they got all decked out and came and they captured a whole lot of balls. And so that was a lot of fun. The medical director there, this was actually going on, like Matt said, I'm relatively newly minted to the CEO position here. And this was going on during the CEO interviews. So that made for interesting times, especially as you can see in the last picture there. That's Desiree Partain on the left. She's the one that came up with these great plans and she stole my beach ball. So, but it was a lot of fun. We've really enjoyed that. It's brought a lot of fun and entertainment to the organization. That's one of the examples we did. We've done the traditional feeding folks and really just kind of spending time with them. We don't, there was a lot of talk initially about culture and how you make culture better, and and it's through actions. We don't have it all figured out for sure. We make mistakes like everybody else does, but mutual respect, listening to people, having conversations about what makes the system better, and them understanding that work is it's work. We're going to have things to do. Everybody's going to have rough days, but also kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of how your frontline crews are doing, dispatchers and field people and billing and everybody else that's involved in your system is really important, because we've just kind of been fortunate enough. We've been able to push out our supervisors into the field a little bit more, and as people have hard times with things, we sit down and we talk through them. If we take a look at the amount of time, vacation time that they're using, PTO, whatever your system uses, and if they haven't burned it for a while, we'll have a conversation with them about taking some time off and what their plans are. So, those are some efforts that we've gone to, and they've paid dividends. It's worked really well, knock on wood. This past year, we've had the lowest turnover percentage we've had in the last 3 years. And so and I think by and large, they're having a lot more fun doing it. We address things early on. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we kind of had a lot of conversations about what was important to people. Everybody's seen it. Most people on this call are either involved in EMS at the frontline level or in some sort of leadership level. There's all kinds of signing bonuses and shift differentials and all other sorts of initiatives to try to get people in the door and catch people's eye. My experience is people aren't terribly interested in that. Shift differentials do, it's a question that we get. But what we found was we were paying $4 an hour as a shift differential on the weekends, for example. And then people were leaving MedStar to go work at other ambulance services that didn't do shift differentials. The benefits package might not have been as good, things like that. They tended not to translate that into their hourly rate. And then likewise, every other year we do employee engagement surveys. We may start doing those a little bit more frequently because you get a lot of good information in them. And one of the pieces of feedback we got was, when you start out with EMS, you end up on the weekends and nights. And so you think everything's going really well because you don't really realize how much that $4 an hour shift differential is adding to your paycheck. And then you gain some seniority, kind of settle down, maybe get married, whatever the case is. And you want to switch to a different schedule because we have a bazillion different schedules for people that doesn't work as many weekend days or as many nights. And all of a sudden you realize that, you're taking a pay cut for it. So we went back and we took a look at our shift differentials and we built them back into the hourly rates. We figured out how much everyone was getting annually from shift differentials, and we went and made sure that nobody took pay cuts. So everybody at least broke even, if not got a little bit more of an increase. We explained to people that, hey, when you hit, overtime, you're going to, this will benefit you a little bit more if you're investing in our retirement. in our match. This will again benefit you more because it goes into the retirement and it's calculated into the match. And so that was very well received, and it hasn't really missed a beat. We haven't had huge vacancies on the weekends of a lot of people calling off or anything like that. Retention and performance bonuses are another thing that organization has done kind of on an annual basis. And what we found is when you do it annually, people sort of lose focus of what the bonus was around. And so we're taking a look at opportunities to do that on a more quarterly basis. And instead of just doing annual merit increases, we'll be going back to doing annual performance-based increases, because we got a lot of feedback that people didn't like that. And it was kind of a disincentive for them to work harder and produce better numbers. So we're going through streamlining that a little bit. Benefits are another thing that always comes up. For us, it's a little bit different being governmental because of some of the tax differences and implications in some of the different programs. So we try to, for the most part, educate our employees as far as, if childcare is important to you, as we do pay increases and things like that, we have programs that offer a tax break to you to do that. If that's not important and retirement's more important, then, you can do that as well. Of course, you can do all of them at the same time. Health savings accounts are another program that we offer. It's just as we kind of polled our frontline folks as far as what was important to them, it spreads everywhere. It just depends on what stage in life they're in. We looked at student loan repayment. We looked at child care credits. We looked at benefit decreases, and it was very difficult to get a consensus. And so we opted to give pay increases and provide some instruction as far as how to take some tax advantages with the increases that they're doing. The other thing that we've done is we've seen a big shift in, wanting more time off and things like that, which is great. And so we've done some self-scheduling options. The hospitals do this a lot. We've got a little bit of experience with it. The big premise with this is really, we went through and figured out, kind of how many hours per week we were looking for these folks to work, and how many weekends on average you'd work on a normal shift, and how many holidays you normally work in a year. And so we just built some requirements around it. And, like they've got to work 4 weekends out of the month, and they've got to work X number of hours per week, and they can pick up any open slots that there are. And people really responded very positively to this. It allows them, if they've got a spouse that's working a schedule, allows them to match up with their spouse. If they're trying to go to school for something, they can do that. We have a lot of EMTs. We also offer scholarships to put people through paramedic school programs. We've done the academy programs before. We find that we're able to help a lot more people by offering self-scheduling and scholarship programs. So that's been positive. And then, of course, we also offer our peer support programs, which are Hope Squad. I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier. They like many peer support groups, they reach out to their coworkers and things like that. If they've been running bad calls, if they're noticing some changes in behavior or something like that, and try to make sure they're doing okay, and if they need any kind of help with anything. And for the most part, we stay out of that. Obviously, we're there to help support it if people are needing time off or whatnot, but we want people to have confidence that their issues or whatever will not be shared, and it's not necessarily going to be, the CEO isn't going to necessarily know what's going on with you. But we have a lot of trust in the people that run this program. So, as we move forward, again, I think there's great opportunities in EMS to start changing the industry. I think our payers see this. There's a lot of things with ET3 and telehealth. This is a conversation about workforce strategies, obviously, but I think it really feeds into the direction that we're going to. A lot of the burnout is driven by, people, the EMS system just being used as a catch-all, and it will continue to be used as that. And so the big questions for us are how we can change and how we can work to get the more appropriate resources to the more appropriate places and pay a competitive wage, And that means earn revenue that's commensurate with the benefit to the healthcare systems that we're offering. And so that's the end of my slides. I think we have John Studnick from Medic up next.
Yep, and John, you were referenced earlier with one of the things that you have changed in Medic and did a great job managing that. What are some other things, or tell us more about that program?
Yeah, so the program that we referenced in the earlier slides is our third point. So if you want to flip to my next slide for me, Charlotte, North Carolina, it's another big system. And what we're doing is taking a two-prong approach at the workforce shortage. We have a great HR team here at Medic that's very focused on recruitment, retention, hiring, a lot of the strategies you've already heard. And we know that we have to continue to achieve our primary mission, which is for those individuals who have acute illness or injury, we have to be able to rapidly respond and provide life-saving interventions to those folks. And so we need to be able to fight with the team we have on hand while our HR team is recruiting the new employees that are going to help stabilize the organization. And so we've really looked at an operational perspective of how do we change the operating model here at Medic to support what we are capable of doing while we protect our primary mission. And so we recognize that staffing is a problem, and we're going to either reduce transports, reduce the time we take to interact with patients, or in some cases, we're going to take longer, and that's that response configuration at the end, and use that time to benefit the system. So we'll talk through these three interventions pretty quickly. So we'll go on to the first slide. Lyft is what we call it. It's a rideshare company. If you're at the bar and you need a trip home, you use on your phone and Lyft will come pick you up. We don't contract with Lyft directly. We contract with a parent company called Circulation. Circulation then contracts with Lyft to provide rideshare to the healthcare community. So EMS use of Lyft is one opportunity, but healthcare systems in general can use ride share to move non-acute patients around the community. So for Medic, how this works, we use medical priority dispatch, and we have our very low acuity calls, which are classified in medical priority dispatch as Omega, or appropriate for conversation with a nurse advice line. We transfer these patients to the nurse advice line. If the nurse advice line comes back and says, yeah, this patient's low acuity, they need to be seen by a provider, but this isn't an ambulance concern. And unfortunately, this patient doesn't have any mode of transport. So you end up in this bind. And how we used to manage it was say, shrug our shoulder and say, well, I guess we'll send an ambulance and take them to the hospital. But we know that this patient has a low or no acuity issue, may need to see a physician for a prescription refill or some other low concern. And so we contracted with Lyft and developed a process to identify these low acuity patients. And then instead of sending an ambulance, we send a Lyft. And you can see here is our patient guide, how we talk patients through the process, inform them what we're going to do. And most importantly, with the circulation agreement, we must obtain the patient consent. So the patient has to consent to use Lyft for their transport. And then we have our process that we go through on our right, on the right. And we've got some business rules set in for Lyft, how far we'll take someone in a Lyft, what the maximum cost we'll pay for a Lyft, et cetera. And you can see that in the bottom left box of our process. And so this process has been operating for about a month and a half. And if you go to the next slide, is a great analytics package that comes with Lyft as a program. And we can see the general starting point and finish points of Lyft transports within our community. And so we can see the length of the line is how far the trip was. The hot spots, right, that look really dark, those are our downtown receiving centers. So you see we have a lot of business going downtown, but it's relatively well distributed throughout our community. And so far, we've had very positive feedback from both the patients and the drivers. We're a 5-star application on Lyft. And so we really feel as this is an important intervention to reduce those transports that come into our call center that we know are not medically necessary and we know can be managed another way. And then, so that's a little bit about how we've got some activity going on in Lyft. We'll flip to the next slide. So we know also that there are those patients that are low acuity that call 911 because they're not certain what to do. We're their, healthcare of last resort, whether it's an access problem or whether it's late at night or they don't have connections with a PCP. And so we've developed a protocol to quickly triage patients on scene to determine if they understand what ambulance transport can provide to them, how much it costs, and whether or not they want to use our services or if they want to seek healthcare in a different method. And so we anticipated that there were about 12,000 low acuity patients every year that may end up not choosing to be transported to the hospital if a shared decision-making conversation was had with them. These are low acuity patients who may not meet the definition of medical necessity and may just have questions that they want answered about their care. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what that protocol looks like. So these are BLS level patients that are conscious, alert, and oriented. They have to be greater than 18, normal vital signs. And this is for low acuity trauma or low acuity general illness. And we know we see a lot of those types of patients, whether they're low end motor vehicle collisions or I've been feeling kind of icky for 2 days, flu-like symptom complaints. We have a set of pretty strict exclusions. We don't want to have conversations with ALS patients about not being transported to the hospital. We want to make sure those happen. And so if you go to the next slide, when we talk to these patients, we do a full assessment, and then we're very transparent with what we're seeing. Your vital signs are normal for who you are and your conditions. We want to talk to you about what ambulance transport is going to do for you today. We are happy to transport you to the hospital, but what we will do is put you on the stretcher. We're going to take your vital signs again, transport you to the hospital. In this era of COVID, you may not see an emergency department bed for the next 2 or 3 hours. We may put you in triage. Your condition is not high acuity. And then we ask the patient, do you want us to take you to the hospital in an ambulance, or do you want to seek care in some other way? This is not a patient or a provider initiated refusal. Rather, it's presenting options to the patient relative to their ambulance transport. If the patient wants to be transported, we will obviously take them. And if they don't, we will clear on a shared decision-making type conversation. The key to this interaction is we've informed our providers that we have to do this in 5 minutes. You have to do an assessment, identify that they're a BLS patient, meet the criteria, and start the conversation with these patients. If you find those recalcitrant patients that say, hey, I called 911, I want to go to the hospital, don't bother having this conversation, just take them to the hospital. It's more time effective than trying to change someone's mind. What we want to do is identify those people who want an explanation of what is going on with their care. And then if we can do it quickly, we can buy the transport time back, be able to clear from these calls a little quicker and put ambulances back into service. If you'll go to the next slide, we'll see some of our data. We're doing about 41 of these conversations a week. And our safety measures we do have in place. Our medical director reviews every time we have 48-hour recidivism. So the same patient calls back within 48 hours. We've had 11 incidences over the last 5 weeks of that. And there have been no adverse events related to these point conversations and allowing people to make the decision, not that they're refusing care, but they in fact don't desire ambulance transport because it's not the best for their healthcare need. And so we've twisted the conversation so that patients don't get scared off by the language. Well, we're happy to take you to the hospital, but if you refuse to go with us, you could experience a seizure, coma, death, and it would be a terrible tragedy if you don't transport with us to the hospital. Instead, we get to have the conversation. It doesn't look like an ambulance is going to benefit you with the healthcare issues you have today. We're happy to take you, or you can seek care another way. And so far, 5 weeks of implementation, these seem to be very safe conversations and are buying time back into our system so that we avoid the transport and the hospital delays that come with transporting these days and get units back into service quicker. The final set of slides here are that intervention. So if we flip the next slide, is our response configuration changes that Matt mentioned at the top of our deck. And so we've made a big change in how we respond to emergencies within our community just within the last week. So we do about 156,000 responses in a year. 107 of those end up as transports. And only 6% of our transports are life-threatening, our priority 1 transports. And we've seen this bear out in pre-hospital research throughout the country, where a very low percentage of the transports we do at EMS require potentially life-saving intervention. And so if we understand that, and we understand that we are currently a resource-strapped system, so we don't have enough supply to meet the potential demand in our communities, we have to think about how we're going to manage that demand differently. And so our current response configuration, I should say our past response configuration, was very similar, I'm sure, to many of the systems on the calls. We have Echo Delta response in less than 1059, 90% of the time. Everybody goes red lights and sirens. Charlie and Bravo hot responses, 1259, 90% of the time, red lights and sirens. There's 100,000 responses a year in this bucket. It's a lot of responses in this mid-tier, is it an emergency, is it not an emergency bucket? And then we have no red lights and sirens responses for ambulances on our Bravo, Colds, and Alpha, and our Omega transport onlys, which we're trying to convert into those lift trips, right? So if we flip to the next slide, we took a look at that bucket of 100,000 patients a year. So we looked at 2 years, our Charlie Bravo hot calls. 34% of them come from non-911 callers. They come from the police. They come from the fire department. Hey, there was a wreck on X road. Everybody needs to go and take a look. So we excluded those from this bucket. 65% of them went through our telephone triage process. And so we received an MPDS determinant. And of those 65%, 60,000 or 30,000 in a year had a priority 1 transport rate of less than 2%. It was actually like 1.6% of those transports had a potentially life-saving intervention occur. And so then we asked the question, if in these 25,000 calls, only 1% of them have a potentially life-saving intervention occur, why are we rushing to those calls? How can we spend our time better, knowing that we have limited supply and high demand, and we must reach our high priority patients quickly? And so we evaluated that set of calls and came up with a new response configuration, which is on the next slide, please. We changed our times. So Echo and Delta remains the same. Everybody goes hot, 10:59 response. Charlie Bravo hot, same time, everybody goes hot. And then we included a new line, call them Sierra responses. We have 30 minutes to respond to a Sierra response, 90% of the time. We're going to continue to send our first responders red lights and sirens because there's that 1 to 1.5% chance that an individual could be having a life-threatening condition. And as an EMT, they can get on scene and provide good basic life support skill, upgrade the ambulance, and we manage that patient. But now the ambulance is not going red lights and sirens, and we don't have to be there for 30 minutes. And so we have increased the amount of potential time we have on 25,000 calls to better manage the resources in our system. We also took a look at our Bravo Colds and our Omega transport onlys and drastically changed the time commitments to those as well. An Alpha or Bravo Cold gets 60 minutes, and an Omega transport only. So a call that comes back from the nurse advice line that would be appropriate for a lift has 90 minutes to receive a response. Same day service. These are very low acuity patients. And if we can increase that time, we can spend that time wisely. And the next slide, you'll see this is the money in that process, right? And so this is our low acuity process for dispatching. Now that we have a critical mass of low acuity calls where we have between 30 and 90 minutes to arrive, we don't have to have our system status controllers looking at the board, looking at initial assign and send, and make it a, kind of a rote decision. We just send ambulances fast. No, we stop and we hold and we think, what is the best resource to send? Should we send BLS resources? Should we send an ALS resource, but wait until we have geographic or demand coverage in the area in which the call we're going to pull that ALS resource out of? We take time. And that's what no red lights and sirens response with an appropriate response time requirement allows you to do. It allows us to build hours into our system without having the people to actually build the hours. So I know we're running quite late in our schedule. So I blew through those 3 interventions pretty quickly, reducing transports by using Lyft, having shared decision-making conversations with patients so they know that they don't have to utilize our services if they don't need to, and then really having a big impact on how we manage the system by adding time in by increasing our response time. So thanks. We'll pass it off to Sam.
Great, Sam. So for the state regulatory perspective, take her away. What's your thoughts?
Thanks, Matt. My name is Sam Hurley. I'm the state EMS director for the state of Maine. Can we move forward? So I think it's important for us to begin this conversation with managing expectations. We would all love to have that top bar where I have the silver bullet and I fire it. We're going to get from point A to point B. But the reality is the bottom situation is probably a little more accurate. It may even be cleaner. This may even be cleaner than what the actual pathway is for us to get where we need to go. And so that's the thing is really managing our expectations. I wish I could give you the solution today. And we've heard some incredible solutions and options that are available, but again, it's really what's best for your community. And a lot of these interventions and systems level changes are going to take time. So just wanted to start with some commentary about managing expectations. The next thing I really want to talk about is something that the state of Maine is emphasizing is the encouragement of community self-determination. We've talked a lot about money and increasing wages and, we're going to have a BLS or ALS response or who's going to go. And I think a lot of that is up to the community to make that determination. And so Maine EMS is really encouraging communities in the state of Maine to emphasize on this community self-determination model. In public, some of the leaders in our community have actually put together a model to do this, and it's accessible online. It costs about $15,000 to do this process, but it's a guided process where it surveys and evaluates with the community's input on what they want. And so I think that's really important because they're going to be the ones paying for it, whether it's increase in taxes or increasing costs of services. So it's really important to get that community engagement and consensus about what they want and that community decision making. So, especially in the state of Maine with rural agencies, I think there's this expectations that there's going to be a paramedic that comes every time. However, if you're only receiving, $100,000 a year to run your service in tax-based revenue support, that may be insufficient in paying for that if you only run, 300, 500 calls a year, because we have a lot of rural services in the state of Maine. So really engaging the community and letting them opine on what they want and showing them the cost of what they want. So that way you get the buy-in. Next slide. And, you know, like I was saying, what does the community deem acceptable? So do they want, are they okay with a 20-minute response time? Are they okay with only BLS coming and ALS being dispatched from another area? And there may be a 30-minute response time for ALS. Do they want community paramedicine? What do they want? And also engaging the hospitals in your area, especially in some of our more rural hospitals where the EMS agency is also responsible for conducting those interfacility transports out of those hospitals to our tertiary care centers. It's important to have those folks at the table to say, you know, an EMT cannot take a vented patient. It's not going to happen. And so, you know, if we have to have a medic on standby to get on this truck, or we need to have a nurse, are you going to pay for it? Are you going to staff that? Are you going to provide training? Are you going to provide support? Are you going to provide fiscal resources? And so really bringing those stakeholders into the table and into the mix is incredibly important. And in Maine, there's actually a piece of legislation that's going to make this model, actually, the state will help finance municipalities and counties to perform this assessment. Again, that's draft legislation, so we'll see what happens with that. But this has been done in multiple counties throughout the state of Maine, and it's been very effective at really understanding what the needs are for the area, and then helping the community understand those needs and the cost of meeting those needs. So you have the buy-in from the communities. Next. So EMS in Maine, we have a very rural environment. We have our largest town in the state of Maine is less than 80,000 people. That's the city of Portland. So we are highly rural for the most part. One thing is that in the state of Maine, we are moving towards greater professionalization, but historically, EMS in Maine had been a vocation. It had been something that you did, you volunteered, or you did it on the side in addition to your day job. But now we're really trying to move that marker where this is a profession, this is something you're doing full time, this is your job. And we're not trying to get rid of volunteers. That's certainly not the motivation here, but we need to make sure that you don't hope and pray that someone's putting chlorine in your water from the local water plant that they volunteered and they're coming in to put chlorine in the water to kill the bacteria. You expect them to do that. We don't expect someone to come provide EMS services for free either. It just doesn't make any sense. And so we're really trying to further professionalize the field here in Maine. And so I referenced the 2019 AAA report regarding turnover with 20 to 30% turnover annually. We do not have statewide data on that turnover rate. However, you know, looking at those numbers, that is particularly concerning and something that we have been working on addressing, and I'll go into that shortly. One thing that we really are concerned about in the state of Maine is the mental health of our clinicians with fatalities, suicides, PTSD, and other factors that come into play when we're talking about retention of staff members. Is if we're burning them out and, you know, they're killing themselves, that doesn't work. And so Maine EMS has been working diligently to ensure that we have regional and statewide resources available to our agencies throughout the state. Because like I was saying, we have a lot of rural, small EMS agencies that may not have the capacity of the MedStars or other companies that have large infrastructure to support them. They may rely on the state to provide that support. And so recently we received another $120,000 in fiscal support to do outreach to folks to help minimize the stigma of mental health issues. Again, that's not going to fix the problem per se, but it's just chiseling away one little bit at a time across the state. And next slide. So the thing, I believe Jay Bradshaw, the executive director of the Maine Ambulance Association, is on this call, and I did borrow this slide from him from a recent presentation we did together here in Maine. But luckily, our Maine Care and Medicare rates are now equalized. However, it doesn't include the modifiers, so the rural and super rural, which those are applicable to a large part of our state. And so we do have some opportunity for growth. And it's really important for us to come up with alternate pathways for sustainability. And so Maine is really focusing on expanding our community paramedicine program. So we are investing currently $3 million in the build out of our systems of care and our community paramedicine over the next 2 years here in the state of Maine. That will include building a specific community paramedicine training program that's built for the state of Maine by the Maine Community College System, as well as direct grants to EMS agencies to really bolster community paramedicine. Additionally, that funding also includes some funding to ensure that our Maine Care office actually, so our Medicaid office actually pays for community paramedicine. So we do have some private payers that are paying for community paramedicine in the state of Maine, but we will have our public payer paying for community paramedicine by the end of next year, which is a great win for sustainability of our system if we're opening up more avenues for income. The cost reporting is something that Maine EMS is really interested in getting more data about. It's really hard to make the argument with legislators and with insurers if we don't have data to support it. It costs a lot of money. That's a poor argument. And so, especially in the state of Maine, when we have very rural agencies that may not have the infrastructure that, say, a MedStar or another system may have, it's really important that we help support these agencies in doing cost reporting so that we can have more accurate data, so that we can make cogent arguments to our insurers and to legislators about the cost of doing business in the state of Maine. And so this is really important for us in understanding the actual cost of doing business. And recently we had legislation that eliminated surprise billing, but standardized some reimbursement rates. For some agencies, it was not advantageous. They actually went down. However, for others, they went up to meet a standardized reimbursement rate of 2 times the Medicare rate. Next slide. So interventions. So one thing that Maine EMS is doing right now is we are putting an emphasis on recruitment retention research. We have an entire committee dedicated from our board to recruitment and retention and addressing our labor and workforce shortages. We also have dedicated research funding with the University of Maine system to ask the question of why people are and are not joining the system or staying in the system. And it's really important for us to ask that question because we as administrators think we know what the answer is, and we probably do know many of the answers, whether it's low wages or burnout or other issues, but we need to ask the question of the individuals themselves and solicit their opinions directly rather than going at it with what we think it may be. We're also working to increase funding and support for training and education. Like I said, we have the $3 million. We also are putting another $3 million in education over the next 4 years. We're really emphasizing the creation of a career ladder, creation potentially of new licensure levels in the state of Maine. Our existing regulations allow for drivers, that unlicensed drivers, but now we will have a licensure process for drivers that just ensures that they have emergency vehicle operator course, the mental health support resources, reimbursement changes, and expanding services capabilities for sustainability. And as I said, the ambulance staffing requirements are something that were pre-existing prior to Maine, but we did grant waivers so that people could more readily and quickly change their staffing models with their services. So I know we're out of time, so I'm gonna think that's it for me, but I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Sam. Amazing job. Great chat going on. I think, we are at pretty much the end of our planned time. If it's okay with the presenters, we'd like to stay another 10 minutes and run through some of the questions that have come in on the chat first, since those folks joined us. And I think what we may do is wrangle the presenters to agree to write an article on this topic and answer a lot of the questions that we haven't been able to get to. So I think what we're going to do first is I want to pose some of the questions to the panelists. First, Craig, there was an early question about your streamlined credentialing, and Ken, you did it here at MedStar with the Office of Medical Director in 1 minute each. Describe how you're able to streamline your credentialing process, and we'll start with Craig.
I'm going to send all of our stuff out. So if you pop me an email, I'll send it to you. And basically what we did is we exploded the whole process and put it back together piece by piece to do academy classroom, followed by field preceptorship, closing out with capstone with a doctor. And so we've been able to keep high quality and reduced our amount of time on task. So happy to share anything that we're doing there.
Ken?
Yeah, we I've honestly, the Office of the Medical Director went through and revamped the process. And really the whole central theme around it was, right place for the right training. And so they have once a week, they revamped it so that once a week, all the trainees come back in and they go through a skills checkoff and scenario-based training in the classroom. And the other 6 days a week, they're on a truck. So not all 6 days, just whatever their rotation hits. That way they get the field experience and the operational pieces there, and the opportunity to do some of the interventions on real patients. But the whole sort of checkoff sheet and proficiency with actually the knowledge of how to do the skills is done in the classroom. So we've cut about 20% off of our training time with that.
And our operations director implemented mandatory overtime for all new hires, so they're all working 80 hours. No, I'm totally kidding. Totally kidding. Get them done quicker. This was a great question for John that came in from Rob McClintock. Does North Carolina have any patient abandonment regulations, and how can a first responder leave a patient after making patient contact while waiting for the ambulance to arrive on scene?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So, and I put it in the chat too. We had very direct conversations with North Carolina Office of EMS and North Carolina State Medical Director. Our medical director proposed the protocol relative to assessing a patient on scene, a first responder assessing a patient on scene, and being able to go available. And so the State Office of EMS said 3 things. If the patient meets the protocol criteria for a first responder to go available on scene, the patient consents, agrees that the first responder can go available on scene, and the patient has an opportunity to recontact 911 if their condition were to change and the first responder were to have departed, then it is not patient abandonment, and the first responder can go available. And if a higher priority call occurs in their area, they can respond to that call while the medic unit continues to respond to the initial patients. And so we did a lot of background work to be able to develop that protocol and have it approved by North Carolina Office of EMS and State Medical Director.
Awesome, awesome. All right, here's another good one. So a lot of you talked about alternate staffing models, EMR with an EMT, EMT paramedic, BLS units. For those systems that have done it, have you seen a change in your reimbursement? Because sometimes the ALS reimbursement is tied to staffing. Was that a difficult transition from a reimbursement perspective?
Speaking for Richmond, no. Because an ALS call is an ALS call and a BLS call is a BLS call. So we haven't really seen that much of a change since we went to the tiered system.
Yeah, same situation in Pinellas. In some ways, it's helped us better match what we're providing to what we're getting paid.
And the same thing here in Fort Worth, as you know.
Yeah, and I think where some folks might get confused is there was a period of time where CMS and people were using a lot of the ALS assessment. You get an ALS determinant, you send a paramedic, you do an ALS assessment, you can get reimbursed at an ALS rate. I think honestly that stopped like years ago, and Medicare's not doing that anymore. So even if you have an ALS crew, if it's a BLS call, it's a BLS call, you get a BLS reimbursement, and we're done with it. So another good question that came in, Craig, are you recruiting people from the United Kingdom?
Apparently we are. Yeah, we've got 2 that we're working with, and the School of EMS is helping them out. So I didn't have any direct on that, but yeah, we're hitting a lot of social media. So apparently that's going wide and far.
Okay, very cool. All right, so we've got, let's take three more minutes before we thank everybody. And let's just do a round robin around our Hollywood squares here and talk about mandatory vaccines, because we know that was been a hot issue right now. How are you addressing it either in your state, Sam, or in some of your agencies? And what do you think the impact is going to be if you really have to implement mandatory vaccines? And Ron, we haven't heard from you in a while, and we love the Boston accent. Mandatory vaccines at Cataldo, what's up?
Right, thanks. Yeah, difficult decision, but we chose to mandate here at Cataldo Ambulance. Again, about 850 employees. October 15th was our date. We were very successful. We've been a big administrator of the vaccine here in the state, so we've made it available to all of our employees. We've had about 99% compliance. At the end of that timeline, October 15th, we ended up departing 5 employees. We were very respectful of certain requests, medical and religious requests. We've involved our medical director, we've involved an attorney, and ultimately accepted the medical request. There's a clear process in place for them to test weekly and to mask at all times while working. And so we weathered the storm okay, but the biggest factor for us was most, if not all, of the major hospital systems in and around the Boston market have mandated that if you want to work with us, you'll be vaccinated. So that's the decision we went.
Okay. And Wayne, how is Richmond?
We're at 95% first dose and 92% fully vaccinated, and pretty much the same thing that Ron stated. We have some people that may not make our October 31st deadline, but again, that's their choice. We are respectful for both the medical and religious aspects of it. But in the end, it's going to be the choice of the person that has neither one of those to make the decision for themselves.
Right, keep working or get vaccinated.
Correct.
Sam, how about in Maine? A little different story, maybe?
Yeah, so in the state of Maine, there was a healthcare rule that went into effect from the governor's office as well as the Department of Health and Human Services. And Maine EMS, the board, also passed a rule requiring all individuals providing direct patient care, so within 6 feet for 15 minutes or greater, be vaccinated for COVID-19 no later than October 15th. So it's over as far as the requirement. It's implemented. We did have approximately 3% of the workforce that opted not to get vaccinated. There was a medical exemption process, but not a religious exemption process. That was done through a statewide vote that happened in 2019 that eliminated religious exemptions in the state of Maine for vaccination. So it's either you have a medical exemption or you get vaccinated or you do not provide direct patient care. Those are your 3 options. And so, you know, it's tough in this environment, as you know, the system's already stressed. However, you know, as healthcare workers, there is a requirement for us to serve the people that we work with, and many of those are in extremis or immunocompromised. And we also work in congregate living environments, bunk rooms, stations, those are essentially congregate living environments. And so it's important to protect not only the workforce that we have, but the workforce that we will have in the future, as well as the patients that we serve. So different stance from the state of Maine, but it's been a little rocky, but we have gotten through it. And yeah.
Okay, and Ken.
This is Texas. Our governor is not mandating anything here in Texas. As a matter of fact, he has prohibited anyone from mandating any vaccines here. So basically, we are strongly encouraging it with our employees. I think percentage-wise, from what we've seen and heard, if and when it gets mandated, we will probably see similar levels of folks that leave, because as I'm sure everybody's aware, President Biden has instructed CMMS to draft regulations requiring vaccinations for anybody that receives federal funds. So, I think in the long run, the federal government will win because they kind of have the power of the purse strings. But until that happens, we're just encouraging people. We're providing some incentive programs to help incentivize those to get vaccines. Got about 67%, 68% or so that have at least one dose of the vaccine. So we're continuing to work on that.
Yeah, when you say that you got shot in Texas, sometimes that has a little different meaning. That means you tried to rob somebody. So, all right, I want to thank these guys for being part of this panel. They put a lot of time, energy, and effort, as you saw in some of the information. We will gather the herd and get an article out to the community and the profession, and make sure that everyone who attended does get a copy of that article. We also, several have asked, but we'll say officially the recording and the slide deck will be available either at both at the AIMHI website, but also many of the partner agencies and associations that helped us put this webinar together and helped promote it. So sorry we kept everybody about 10 minutes late, but we thought it was a valuable conversation. Thanks for the 256 of you that hung in to the very end. And I hope that you have a very safe rest of the day. And thank you for what you're doing in EMS in your communities.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Have a great day.